We have already created our first Xamarin Forms application, but we created it using a shared project. From now on, we're going to be using a different kind of project, a .NET Standard project, which is the best way to share code between platforms. So the .NET Standard is actually quite new. In fact, you will see that along the lectures, we are going to be working with the previous version of the .NET Standard, which is a PCL, which we have also briefly covered in the past section when we compared it to the shared project. While we were recording these lectures, we were using a version of Visual Studio that still allowed us to create PCL projects, so that's what we used. But as version 15.5, the PCL has been replaced with .NET Standard. So this is the one that we are actually going to be using. The .NET Standard is a specification of .NET APIs intended to work on all .NET implementations, whether that be Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android, or something unrelated to Xamarin like Universal Windows Platform for Windows 10 applications, or simply Windows for desktop Windows applications. And it is aimed to achieve better uniformity. And it is achieving this better uniformity by doing three things. One, it is defining a uniform set of APIs for every single one of the .NET implementations for them to use, independent of the platform or the workload. This means that every single .NET implementation, again, whether that be Xamarin iOS or UWP or Windows, are going to be using the same uniform set of APIs. Also, it is enabling developers to create portable libraries that any .NET implementation can use. So instead of creating portable libraries that may only work for certain .NET implementations, by targeting .NET Standard, these portable libraries will work with any .NET implementation. And it's going to be eliminating conditional compilation, meaning that instead of defining on our code that some things work for one platform and some things for other platform, the .NET Standard will allow the same code to run on any platform. So the new way to creating Xamarin projects is this. Again, during the course, you will see this window quite often. In fact, you've already seen it once when we created the previous application. And in the previous application, we selected Xamarin Forms and we selected Shared Project. And from now on, we're going to be selecting .NET Standard, which again replaced PCL. So from now on the two lectures that you may see that I select PCL, you will no longer see PCL, but it's okay. You can select .NET Standard and it will be practically the same thing. So this is the only thing that has changed when creating your Xamarin projects. Instead of selecting PCL, you will be selecting .NET Standard. You will still have the Xamarin Forms and native UI technology options. So given that maybe some of you have previously created projects with PCLs, and you will notice that I, during the course, create projects with PCLs, let's compare these two. The .NET Standard is going to provide better uniformity across .NET implementation. And again, it's going to achieve this by generating a curated set of APIs that will work in the same way on any .NET implementation. The PCL, on the other hand, it's going to make some things available to some platforms and some things to others. This is performed by intersections of existing platforms, meaning that if something can work on both Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, then a PCL that targets both of these platforms will allow all of these that is shared between these platforms to be available. But if suddenly the PCL has to target also Windows, then the intersection is smaller because there are less things inside of the platform that are shared between Android, iOS, and Windows, and so on. As the PCL needs to support more platforms, the smaller the intersection. The .NET Standard allows for code sharing, so does the PCL. So again, this is still going to be a code sharing strategy. And also the .NET Standard is going to be platform agnostic, while the PCL represents Microsoft's platforms. So the advantages of the .NET Standard, not that we have an alternative anymore on Visual Studio, since like I said, we already have that .NET Standard option and no longer the PCL, but it really does have very good alternatives. For instance, most Node.js packages have already been updated to support .NET Standard. And not only that, but they no longer support PCL. So as you may be able to see throughout the course, I'm going to talk about a couple of packages that you should install a previous version of, because the newer versions already targeted .NET Standard and we were working on a PCL. But now, if you create .NET Standard projects, you can ignore that recommendation that I do, because you can now use the latest version of these Node.js packages because they already target .NET Standard. So you will be able to use the latest version of these packages to take advantage of new features or solved errors that maybe previous packages had. Also, .NET Standard projects have greater compatibility with future projects, so if you create a .NET Standard project, it is more future-proofed. If in the future you want to reuse this code, it is better if you had created it as a .NET Standard than as a PCL. And besides, there is practically no learning curve. In fact, there is barely a difference. You won't have to think about the differences between you working on a .NET Standard and me on the next videos working on a PCL, because it looks exactly the same. The only real difference is in the folders that you will have to use to add packages, but it's going to be very easy for you to add them just like on PCLs. Again, the learning curve is barely there. And the only disadvantage that I could think of is that although it is being developed, as at the time of recording this video, some autocomplete snippets aren't available for .NET Standard projects yet. So again, you may see that in the video I create some code practically out of thin air, because I just, in my keyboard, press Tab and Visual Studio autocompletes it. This may be missing in a couple of places with the .NET Standard. It's already available in most places, but you may find a couple of places where it is still missing. I don't think this is a great deal because you can always manually type them and it will take you about 5 seconds to do so. But again, if you feel that this is something that you need, don't worry. We know that Microsoft has been hard at work on these snippets to match the user experience that we had with PCLs up to the new .NET Standard projects. So this was a brief introduction about the .NET Standard, which is the best way to share code between platforms. Remember that from now on, you should choose the .NET Standard to create your Xamarin projects. Even when you see me select a PCL, do not worry if you do not see that option anymore, because like I mentioned, the new .NET Standard is the new way to go. So now, then in the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and create a new Xamarin project in which we are going to work through the first part of this course, and which now will be using the .NET Standard instead of the shared project that we used in the previous section.